What was your I'm stronger than I thought moment? About 2 or 3 months ago my head chef did employee evaluations. As a generally anxious person, I was ready for the worst. Instead I got glowing praise, and the phrase that has stuck with me was technical Oliver is able to do things by herself which would normally take 2 or more people. It helped boost my confidence, and now I'm beginning the process of asking for a promotion. Hey, that's awesome. Good luck with the promotion business. I'm rooting for you. One of my biggest fears was always having a special needs child. So then of course I had one, didn't I? But to my own surprise it turns out I can handle it, at least most of the time. I'm about to give birth and I'm terrified that this will happen to me. I'm worried I won't be able to cope, that I won't be able to provide a good enough life, and that it will destroy my relationship with my husband. I would love to hear more of your work and strategies on how to cope if it were to happen. In 9th grade the army did some training at our school for the PE class and I had to do 10 push-ups. I didn't even know I could do one. When my sister died of cancer, I didn't turn to drinking alcohol. I didn't turn to using drugs. I hugged my family. I went to the funeral, and I donated money to her burial, and I cried a lot. But men are allowed to cry when they lose a loved one. Men are allowed to cry. When I realized I could actually lose my weight, and when I closed out 2017 with 48.9 kilograms lost, when I stood up to those who have stood in my way for so long, when I keep working to get things done, despite how draining it often is. 48.9 kilograms, that's 107.8 in freedom. My dad parked his motorcycle once and kickstand didn't go all the way down, causing it to tip over onto him. He was stuck between the step in the garage and the bike was on top. I heard it and I jumped over the bike, and I was surprisingly able to lift the motorcycle off with the help of him using his legs. It was one of the Harleys with the huge saddlebags on both sides too. Definitely not a light bike. I still don't know how I managed it. Adrenaline. Mothers have lifted massive objects off of their children because of it. When I was working at the YMCA a few years ago, I did CPR training on a dummy and they told me to pound really hard on the dummy's chest like I was doing CPR on an actual person. The problem was that I'm stronger than the average person. Just finished playing college football and pounded so hard on the dummy's chest that I almost broke its head off. That was my aha moment right there. Maybe you shouldn't do CPR. The stronger the pound, the quicker the revival crack splash. A couple of years ago my partner and I went to the rainforest area of the Washington Peninsula. He'd always wanted to see a place called Hole in the Wall. Getting there entails a 2-mile hike across a loose gravel beach. I have multiple sclerosis, and while my mobility is generally unimpaired, I have problems with fatigue. But I have pretty good endurance for walking, and thought no big deal. I'll be super tired by the end, but I can walk 4 miles. Made it there. Scrambled over an obstacle course of slippery rocks, took obligatory pictures and goofed around for a while, then headed back. I underestimated how much harder it is walking in deep gravel than on hard ground, and overestimated my endurance. We hadn't brought enough water, and I hit a wall. About halfway back I sat on a piece of driftwood and cried because I felt so stupid getting myself into this mess. My partner held me and let me cry a bit, gave me the rest of his water, and waited with me until I felt a little better. And we slowly made it back to the trailhead and back to the car. We slept the rest of the afternoon, and the next day we went hiking again, bringing plenty of water and food this time. About a mile in on a steep part of a forest trail, he asked me how I felt. The first thing that popped into my head felt extremely silly to say out loud, but I said it anyway. I feel strong. I like this story a lot. Worked as a warehouse worker for 11 hours and 45 minutes, then slept for 1 hour and worked 8 hours as a cook at my second job, then sleep for 1 hour and back to the warehouse job. This went on for 1 month and I didn't die, which is amazing. Holy crap. Dude, you're like working class Superman. D. Detoxing off benzos. I was on Ativan and Clonopin for years. Absolutely addicted. But a doctor gave them to me, so it had to be okay. Right. Quitting benzos was the hardest thing I've ever done. I can't imagine withdrawal from many types of hard drugs being worse. But I did it and here I am. Pretty proud of that. Well, 2015 was kicked off with my grandma passing away, who raised me. She was practically my mom. So I started 2015 by being flung into adulthood and had to come back home and help raise my brother, aka help him raise himself. I was 21. He was 17. So then I started handling the bills, making sure he went to school. He always skipped by pretending to go and then hoping I missed the truancy call. I never thought I'd survive without her, but I got a lot of emotional support from my best friend. Then at the end of 2016 my best friend was hit by an elderly driver with poor vision and passed away. So I fell into a worse depression and kind of fell back into mourning the loss of my grandmother and my best friend all at once, and it was a really dark time. Her mom and boyfriend pushed me to finish my degree and walk out my college graduation and achieve my dreams. My brother is about to get his get and just got married. He's a small town kid and he's really happy. I'm saving up to travel the world. My country had conscription for many years. I was a geeky, skinny dude. Lots of pimples, thick glasses, oily complexion, the whole deal. Completely sucked at any kind of sport, no ball sense, etc. During the basic training, as they call it, your first 6 weeks you get treated pretty much like you see in the Full Metal Jacket movie. And yeah, there are sometimes suicides. Difference is, those guys could say okay, I'm done and leave. We couldn't, as you forgot the milk has pointed out. In the movie they were also draftees. Anyway, during my training I saw all of the main men from high school, the jocks, the bad boys, etc. Basically everyone that treated me as bully fodder. Saw them break down, cry, beg for their mamas, while I just kept going. I could run for longer. I could take more abuse than any of them. I was mentally way stronger than any of these dudes, although I was physically weaker at first. That improved over time with all the exercise and regular provided meals. I truly walked out of my 2 years of service with my head held high and a new respect for myself. And weighing about 10 kilograms more with a way better complexion. I would often still run into these dudes afterwards and none of them could look me in the eye anymore. It was great. Minor nitpick. The guys in Full Metal Jack were also draftees, not voluntary service. I joined the army in the early 90s. I was not military material. I wasn't sure I could even hang. But I did hang and was successful there. I am stronger than I thought. There's strong. Then there's army strong. When I didn't get a mental breakdown after finding my sister had cancer, while I was getting my college degree in the United States and could go back to see her for the last time. Similar thing happened to me. I was out of the country while my grandfather was on his deathbed. Was told to write my last words. He died before I could send them. I'm not sure how, but I had the resilience to finish my studies well. Cutting contact with my abusive family. Also breaking some guy's nose when I was 12. He kissed me after I told him I didn't want to. 2 weeks after leaving boot camp and entering aircrew candidate school, my then wife told me she wanted a divorce. We knew each other 11 years. High school sweethearts. I didn't know anyone there and was 661 miles from the only town I'd ever lived in. I learned everything about myself during the following year. The good and the bad. Mostly I learned I'm a heck of a lot stronger than I ever would have thought. After 10 years of childhood emotional abuse beforehand, that fricked up my mental state to the point where, after narrowly avoiding listening to a delusion that I should drop out of college to hunt werewolves, I realized I had no idea how normal people actually interacted and had to basically learn from scratch the sorts of things you learn about being social in the first 18 years of your life or so, all while graduated with a high GPA, got a really good job, now better paid than most of my non-mentally ill friends, and ended up with a lot of friends. And, though I don't advise this, never went to therapy either, but recovered entirely on my own. At this point, I'd imagine myself pretty much capable of doing anything within reason. I was watching the last episode of Got with a very attractive friend because I don't have an HBO subscription. She had a boyfriend, so I was making sure to stay purely platonic, but being in a dorm room, She didn't have a couch, only a bed. Really, the only comfortable position was to lay down next to each other. After the episode was over, she put on some movie on Netflix and started making a move. It's difficult turning down an attractive girl you're literally lying in bed with, but I didn't want to be an accessory to cheating. One of my hands slipped off the bar on the bench press and I dropped 165 straight from the rack straight down on my face. I little over a foot distance. It landed between my nose and upper lip, never ended up knocking out or chipping any teeth, breaking my jaw or my nose, or getting knocked unconscious. Just left me with a small scar that only required 3 stitches. Also my face bent the bar slightly in the center. They should clone you. Carrying a 60 kg, 130 lbs, woman over 1 kilometer, whom had hurt her ankle while I was tripping balls on acid and shrooms, while in a Wolf costume at a trance festival. This was 2 days ago. If I'd meet you on that trail I would have insta died of a heart attack. Probably. LSD Wolf carrying his prey back to his den. When I survived losing all of my friends, having my reputation completely slandered, and being repeatedly physically abused from my parents, all while suffering from at the time, undiagnosed autoimmune disease. 2017 sucked. 2018 will be better. This semester of college was heck. Was sick a lot. Got dumped after over a year with my BF. And was working a super awful customer service job that I was finally able to quit midway through the semester. I was so worried my grades were going to be terrible. Still, I did every piece of extra credit, talked to profs, studied my butt off for finals. I put off checking my grades for as long as possible, but when I finally checked, it was the best I'd done in ages. I didn't think I could do it, but I did, and I'm even prouder because I worked so hard for it. The day my mom had a doctor's appointment to find out if she had cancer, I called her to see how it had gone. She proceeded to tell me that the little spot in her lung was stage 4 cancer with mets in her spine, lymph nodes, and breast. I said okay and proceeded to ask about treatment plans. I didn't cry, I didn't waver, I just said okay. My mother had cancer in all of those locations except the spine, but she had it in the appendix as well. Got it removed. I was probably too young to understand, but old enough to know whatever was wrong with my mom was something we had to deal with together. I've had panic disorder for at least 20 years. There were a lot of contributors, but one of the main triggers I had was nausea. I was deathly afraid of vomiting. Something about an involuntary response not letting me breathe while everything shot out of my throat. Well, yeah, of course when you're nervous one of the main physiological responses is a nervous stomach. So my nervousness about nausea begat more nausea and the crappy cycle continued. But here's the thing. I never actually threw up. I avoided drinking alcohol, and despite all my fears nothing ever became of my nausea. So there was even more fear of the unknown. Fast forward 15 years after this all started, I'm now 30 and living on my own. Go to a wedding one Saturday, have a great time, head home, sitting on the couch, and apropos of nothing suddenly I feel something new, real nausea. Real holy crap nausea. I found out later that a bunch of people, including me, at the wedding contracted norovirus. If you're not familiar, good for you. Imagine your body had an eject button. Norovirus pushes that button. Everything inside you finds the closest hole and shoots out. Entire contents of your stomach, flying out of your mouth at breakneck speed. Anything further down in the digestive tract, all aboard the express train to watery diarrhea junction. Toot toot. Needless to say I made it to the bathroom, basically had a meltdown begging the fates not to make me puke. And then about 30 seconds later my stomach said frick you and I puked. A lot. For a while. When I had no more to give, I sat down by the toilet. Alive. I did the thing I was afraid of most in the world and survived. I cried. I laughed. And to nobody in particular I yelled you wanna kill me mother. Well you're gonna have to try a lot harder than that. I felt freaking invincible. Then I spent the next 2 days crapping my brains out until I was delirious from dehydration. But I digress. That marked a turning point in my battle with panic. It was by no means the end, but it started me on a path to where I am today, which is essentially panic free, and all it took was a 3-day puke and shitapalooza. I don't even know you and I'm oddly proud of you. Way to go. At 32 I found out my wife, now ex, was having an affair with a guy she knew in high school. I was an active duty soldier with about 6 months from it. Leaving the army, she bolted from VA to MI under the guise of taking care of her father and only returned to get her things a few months later. We had 2 teenage boys at the time. Our oldest son I adopted when we got married and our youngest I had when I was 17 and she was 20. Very small town. It's a whole story unto itself. She was my first and it was very hard. I was dealing with divorce crap. 2 teenage boys who were confused and hurt and I was trying to get out of the army and land a job. Luckily my army job was IT work and I was able to find a job relatively quickly on the outside. But it came down to my last few days of my transition leave to actually start working. I know it pales in comparison to what others have dealt with, but getting through that, on my own, half the country away from my family, was something I look back on and say yeah, I freaking did that, on my own. This isn't perfect now. I still have some lingering issues with being able to rely on my new wife for. I'm pretty protective of my son still, but I'm in a much better place now. I have a good job, making good money, and my new wife, just married in November, is all I could ask for. We argue quite a bit, but we always manage to talk it out too. We manage to work through things instead of just let them be like in my old marriage. I'm much more aware of my wife and attentive to her needs. I may not understand the bulk of her emotions, and she has many and I'm emotionally stunted, but we always talk about things. All in all, I'm a better person for having gone through what I did. I know now that complacency in life and relationships can be a real killer if you're not careful. I don't hold any grudges against my ex. She's still pretty self-centered and looks out for herself, but it is what it is. My youngest is in a much better place now with my wife who talks to him and gives him the maternal care he's missed out with his mom. My oldest is still going through things being 19 and still reeling with mommy issues. I think he'll come around soon. He's currently staying with her and he's finding out firsthand that she's pretty much all about her at this point in her life. Thanks for letting me vent and take it from me. Friends and neighbors, things can always turn around for you. Nothing is ever too late or out of reach if you work through and for things. I left my boyfriend of 3 years. We met at a young age and were unhealthily dependent on each other emotionally. The relationship turned toxic when he stopped trying in most aspects and emotional abuse began. Caring for someone that much and having to walk away for your own sake is very difficult, to say the least. I always hope he's doing as well as I am now, which is immensely happier and more dependent on myself, a group of supportive friends and family. Something to know about me: I am ridiculously phobic of bees, to the point where sometimes I can't leave the house. So one time when I was 17, my brother, 11, went to a birthday party in the park and me and my mom came with him. In the middle of the party, a group of the kids suddenly came running and screaming. It turned out someone had stepped on a hornet's nest in the woods and now these things were everywhere. My brother had what turned out to be 18 hornets in his hair. My mom, knowing my issue, offered me the car keys so I could run away and hide. But I decided to stay and help my brother. I wasn't even scared. That's because they were hornets. I've swiped a wasp out of the air and ripped it in half. But bees? Heck no, stay away. Bees terrify me. Kickboxing practice where we all had to perform a basic 1-2-3 move and I knocked my instructor to the floor when I kicked the bag. Even he was impressed. He said the punches were light but he was not expecting the kick to be so strong. Sometimes I wonder if I should have taken it more seriously, lol. A week of forest survival was fun as well. When despite my awful social anxiety and passive nature, I verbally stood up to a toxic person, ex-friend, and clearly put my feelings into words, not letting the person twist them or manipulate me. I kept eye contact the entire time, which is really difficult for me normally. But I was assertive and strong because I was finally doing what I needed to for my own happiness. I was shocked at my actions, but I am so proud that I finally stood up for myself. I basically hit rock bottom last year, and after my last suicide attempt, my own father called CPS and my children were taken away from me for 2 months. During that time I was allowed to see them twice, but eventually the entire thing was dropped because other than my mental illness, my kids were well taken care of. Please don't try to judge me for attempting to kill myself. I was in a very abusive relationship, and even though the kids were safe, I was not. Not having them for that long, and especially during the holidays, taught me that I could get through something harder than losing my mother and not try to hurt myself in the process. I haven't attempted since then because I've learned being here for them is the most important thing I could ever do, and it's taken a lot of emotional strength I didn't think I had. I carried everything I own into 3 suitcases and a duffel bag and dragged it across the state to a new job where it was a part-time, 10-month contract, but I knew visibility in that area would get me a full-time job in my career. I took the train and then dragged my stuff through Penn Station while crying out of fear and pain. No wonder I have a pinched neck nerve. I was carrying the duffel bag around my neck. I looked insane, I'm sure. 3 years later I'm in a full-time job with a group of friends I met and in a relationship with a man I love very much who I would have never met had I stayed in my hometown. I have a car that I got a license for to keep said job and bought a car by myself in the face of rampant sexism. I got away from a really depressing place and found my life. Looking in the mirror after losing 95 pounds. It's a gradual process, but looking in the mirror that day changed my life. I'm the person I wanted to be. In the space of 9 months I had a miscarriage, got engaged, had my second miscarriage and was dumped 13 days after my second loss. I was left $20,000 in debt. I wanted to die. I thought it would never get better. It's 2.5 years later and I paid off $14,000 of the debt. I own my own home. I'll have the last lot of relationship debt paid at the end of the year. It was awful, but I'm better for it. I spent 1.2 hours in labor. I was terrified of going into labor. Freaking terrified. But after 3 hours of pushing, they offered me a section. My son was born 1.2 hours later. I spent 1.2 hours in labor. Holy crap. But after 3 hours of pushing, they offered me a section. My son was born 1.2 hours later. Oh, not as scary, but still goddamn impressive. Depressed. All I want to do is hide. All the pistons in my brain are firing, driving, pushing me to punch out of work, go home, crawl into bed, and not speak to anyone ever again. But I can't do that, and I won't. I can't let this win. I want my happiness back. 2017 in general, an incredibly turbulent relationship, and subsequent end to that relationship, a diagnosis of severe asthma, the death of a friend, and to top that off, I had to complete a master's degree. I'm still struggling with the breakup, but ultimately I'm still here and kicking. It's a stupid story, but here goes. I was in 5th grade. Got into a fight with a cousin because he was bullying my youngest brother and made him cry. We're at his house and I'm playing cards with his older brothers. He was my age, but his brothers were 20 plus. Yeah, just go with it. Anyways, so I hear my brother crying and so I turn around and look. My brother is on the ground crying and the punk is standing over him laughing. So I run up and punch him right in the face and just start swinging like a madman. I get about 10 punches in before he finally retaliates. As we throw punches, there's a brief moment where time slowed to an incredible pace and I thought to myself, WTF, this guy is so weak, I'm way stronger than him. I can't even feel anything. I thought punches were supposed to hurt. Wait, am I hurting him though? I mean, his face was all red, so I assume I did more damage. And before you guys point out the fact I got in those early cheap shots, let me remind you that he started it. Long story short, my husband and I quit our jobs last year to fulfill a dream of sailing to the Bahamas. We were successful in completing the mission. However, about 10 days after we reached the islands, my father suddenly passed away. Here we were, in the middle of a bay in the Bahamas, having just received the worst news of my life, and needed to get home immediately. There had been a bad front come through, so the seas were too rough to make any kind of voyage. We had to use spotty cell service to make arrangements to fly off the islands with our dogs. Neither had flown before. Find a marina to store the boat, and rent a car to drive the rest of the way home. The next day all the plans fell into place perfectly. We left the bay and sailed 3 hours to the harbor, took an hour taxi ride, flew an hour to Miami, then drove 15 hours to our house. As soon as we walked in the house, we went to the funeral home to help my mom make the decisions about the service. The nightmare whirlwind lasted about 3 days before I realized we hadn't really eaten or slept the entire time. We had literally been living our dream on a sailboat in paradise and suddenly woke up in our nightmare in Virginia. It's been almost a year later and I'm still living in my hometown with my mom, helping her find some sense of normalcy in her life. It has been the most exhausting, emotionally straining year of my life, but now we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I talk to my dad every day since I left for college 10 years ago, and the thought of living one day without him seemed unbearable. Now, we've almost made it a year, and although we still have to take each day one at a time, it has shown me how strong I am for having to hold my head high and do what needs to be done. 9th grade me in strength and development class, benching 30 pounds dumbbells or some weak crap like that. I didn't know what I was doing. One of the football players tells me to quit being a P and come bench these plates. I lay down on the bench and he lifts off for me. I throw it up 10 times like a champ. I was stronger than I thought. When I was about 2 weeks from a really stressful deadline at school, I had anxiety, fevers, nausea and no appetite for 2 weeks. At the end, I found out that I had dengue the whole time. I still managed to submit my requirements with above average grades, which was one of my biggest accomplishments of the year. I also didn't need to be hospitalized, which was a breather on the expenses. When my dad was dying of cancer, even though I just graduated from college, I watched over him because we couldn't afford to keep him in a care center and hospice only came around once a day for a couple of minutes. Initially he didn't want me to see him naked or pee-poo himself in an adult diaper, but there was no getting around that as he weakened. He screamed for us to call the over and over, and I faced scenarios in which I had to decide whether to actually do this because doctors couldn't do anything for him at that serious stage of cancer, and bills were racking up like crazy already. It was goddamn terrifying and I essentially watched him die. He even dropped to my own weight. 110 or 120 pounds, which was terrifying because he's had a big gut for as long as I have lived. I didn't run away, but I cried out of sheer stress and sadness over the time frame. It still pains me now that reflect on this period and how I couldn't do anything for him besides be there for him. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.